Hi. This session focuses on the destination of agency. Agency. Young people can take action and make empowered decisions for their lives. About 30 years ago, I was asked to give a speech at the National Conference of the League of American Orchestras. This is the annual conference when the people who run America's orchestras come together. Some years before, I had started the teaching artist program at Juilliard. It had led to my working with some orchestras, and so I was asked to make a speech because it had gone pretty well. So here I was, inside the strange subculture of classical music. And I got talking to the president of one of America's major orchestras. This is not the music director. This is the business head of the orchestra. And he said to me, Eric, I think of the janitor in my building as having more agency than any of the musicians in the orchestra. And I said, really? How is that? And he said, well, the janitor can choose what cleaning products to use, can change the cleaning routine, can make a real impact on the life of our building. But a musician, first day on the job, sit down, shut up, and get the notes right, comes into work 25 years later, sit down, shut up, get the notes right. I was shocked. But I agree, this was an extreme point of view, but it really captured what is widespread in the professional orchestra world, that the job of musicians is not about agency. And in fact, a professional orchestra is not about nurturing the sense of agency in musicians, nor is the training that gets them there. That's not something I believe or that you believe, not what AIM believes, and certainly is not what the powerful field of music for social impact that we're all a part of believe. Our work is how do we develop those capacities of agency in young people so that they can take action and make empowered decisions in their lives. Agency is that sense that you are the one who is generating your actions. You are in the driver's seat of important choices in your life. You have a sense of control in your life. You feel you can guide what you do with your ideas, and you have faith in your ability to handle a wide range of tasks and situations. You have choices, and you can have an impact on your environment. Remember that part of AIM's mission, which says to help young people harness their inner resources to lead their own lives in and beyond music. The destinations of holistic development and intrinsic motivation develop those inner resources. Agency harnesses the potential of those inner resources and puts those resources into gear. Our young people need more than opportunities. They need the habits of mind, the skills, the confidence to take actions around those opportunities to turn potential into reality. I got to thinking just this morning about how those destinations might fit together in musical work. And this example came to mind. I don't know if it's any good, but I thought it might be useful. Imagine a student hears a song and is inspired by the song they hear, and they decide they want to write a song. Holistic development prepares that student to create with intention, to bring all of herself to the impulse to create, to make stuff she cares about. Intrinsic motivation says, I want to write a song. I think that would be fun and interesting. I want to do that. Agency says, I think I could do something with a song I write. My song could have some kind of impact in the world. Artistry says, I can shape a song that feels right to me, that feels really good to me, the way I see the world. And community says there are people who will encourage me and help me as a songwriter and who will be excited to listen to my song and will welcome its effect on them. Then I went a little deeper into agency and I thought about the three aspects we will focus on: expressiveness, decision making, and creative thinking. This means that young people can think and feel for themselves and express in music and beyond music to make clear, sometimes courageous decisions and follow the consequences, and to bring innovative, fresh, creative thinking to their work in music and beyond. So here's how those three aspects fit into my morning songwriting story. The inner habits of mind our students will develop over time. With the aspects of agency, expressiveness says, I have some things to say. I think they are important and people should hear them in my song. Decision making says, I think I'm going to start by using words, getting some phrases that I feel good about, and that's the way to start. And creative thinking says, I've been thinking about my relationship with my little brother lately. It's cool and I like it. I've never heard a song about that before. I think I'm going to write about that. And I kept going. The aspects under intrinsic motivation say, drive says, when I feel this energy, I finish what I start. I'm going to finish this song. And growth mindset says, I've never written a song before, but so what? I can learn how to do that. And metacognition says, I have a sense of how I've successfully managed new kinds of things, new challenges in the past, so this is going to be no problem. Can you feel how those capacities rise to do something new and courageous in music? Inner voices that make it possible for the young person to take on new challenges, try new things, believe they can do scary things if they try. And can you see how success like that in music could deepen those capacities enough for them to take on big challenges outside of music in the rest of their lives? That's what AIM believes. Okay, back to agency. Think for a moment, and even think into your own experience. What emotions are connected with agency? Control, power, pride, empowerment, fulfillment, resilience, responsibility. Pretty great. What emotions are connected with a weak sense of agency or lack of agency? Compliance, frustration, anxiety, powerlessness, dependency, alienation. When I was thinking about this just yesterday, I ran into this sentence in the New York Times. Quote, a well-known series of experiments was conducted in the 1960s where they discovered that when we sense we are not in control of a situation, we give up trying to make things better. This is called learned helplessness. So many things in our cultures set up young people for learned helplessness. What works against a sense of agency in our young people's lives? You know the answer to that question for your students better than I do, but there are answers that apply everywhere, and there is a lot working against the agency of young people in this world. In fact, in the first draft of this talk, I wrote about so many different things our young people have to push against to develop agency that the talk became a total bummer. It was completely depressing. So I cut out most of that stuff. But to mention a few, our young people face systems and people with power over them who don't want them to develop agency. There are cultural and social traditions and expectations and responsibilities and psychological challenges like trauma and anxiety. There's things like poverty, racism, gender pressures, bad policing, food insecurity, and so much more. And some kids get in trouble when they have to break out of these controls and breathe some oxygen of agency to feel alive, to stay alive. Also, their agency is co-opted, hijacked by commercial interests. So they are conditioned to yearn for stuff they want to get, not yearning for who they can be. There is a research study that has been done in the US for many decades where they ask 10-year-olds what they want to be when they grow up. And they always got a mix of different answers according to minor social trends: policeman, fireman, nurse, astronaut. And then around the year 2000, one answer arose that had come up new for the first time and kept rising until that answer dwarfed all other answers, and it still does. And that answer is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Rich. They sacrifice these identity imaginings for the result of wealth, for power, to get stuff. Their decision-making power is colonized by commerce. The crucial act of making a choice is trained into making a choice among commercial options. And in the face of all these barriers and headwinds, most young people find ways, perhaps small ways, but real ways to express their agency, even if privately. So many of our young people are resilient, they're strong, they're clever. Our programs are essential incubators for their sense of agency in life. We are the adults who can model it, who can cultivate it, and celebrate its growth in them. It's our responsibility. And the etymology of the word responsibility, response in its origin means to promise back. That's our responsibility, the ability to promise back the capacity of agency in the world for our young people. How do we do that? That's the work of AIM. I want to mention two specific tools we use that build agency, and you'll see these modeled by AIM faculty, and hope you will include them in your lesson designs that you develop over time with the help of your coach. The first is enabling constraints. This is a term that describes narrowing the focus of an activity because it helps your students become more successful and go deeper. A limitation that encourages success and depth. An example of that outside of music is if you ask a 5-year-old to draw a self-portrait, kid doesn't really know what to do, so makes a stick figure with a sun and a house, and it's okay, but nothing is learned because the assignment wasn't helpful. But if you ask that same 5-year-old to make 3 lines on that piece of paper that capture 3 feelings they have had today, the kid remembers being annoyed by his brother at breakfast and makes an angry, jagged line, and then remembers seeing a butterfly on the way to school and makes a curvy line, and then remembers an idea he had in class and how it felt to have that idea, and he draws a kind of sparkly image. That work has been agency successful for that student. That student has developed the sense that he can actually capture his inner world in lines. And he is able to do something amazing And eventually that may lead to a portrait. But because of the enabling constraint, it empowered the success of that young learner. We need to do that in music. Simple little example. You ask your students to listen to 2 minutes of music. At the end of it, you say, what are some of the things you noticed? And that's okay. Hands will go up from the kids who like to talk. The kids who don't feel confident or don't like to talk will kind of lean back and let the big talkers take care of that. That's very common in our programs. What if instead you created an enabling constraint? And before the listening, you said, and everyone, would you listen for 2 things you hear in the music that you think maybe nobody else noticed? Notice how that sharpens their attention. It provides responsibility. And at the end of that listening, every kid has something to share and mostly will want to share. And you have a whole lot more hearing distributed and illuminated in the work because of the enabling constraint. We hope you will use enabling constraints in a lot of your activity design and lesson design. A second tool that builds agency is called scaffolding. It uses the metaphor from building construction. You know, you've seen how when they're putting up buildings, they have around the outside different layers that workers can walk on to work on just that particular layer till it's complete, and then they can work on the higher level. In our activities, this means you offer not the whole of an assignment, but you offer one piece of it that is complete and satisfying and interesting in and of itself. So they complete that step. They feel a burst of satisfaction and energy that builds confidence and interest to take the next step that is complete and satisfying and interesting, and then builds the next step that's complete and satisfying and interesting. And you work your way to the top, probably faster, but with a whole lot greater sense of agency amongst the students that builds their confidence. They can take on big things and they can enjoy it all along the way. I hope you undertake scaffolding in your lesson design. You'll see it in many of the lessons that our faculty uses, and I hope you'll build it into the lesson designs you develop with and for your coach. So let's remember the 3 aspects of agency we're especially focusing on. Expression. Agency includes your readiness to know and express what you think and feel in music, in language and other media too. That includes knowing what you think and feel. Just expressing yourself is something, but it's not the goal. To be powerful in agency requires that you have access to your own authentic feelings and thoughts and bring them together and then share them. Many programs like ours around the world have students expressing themselves. They'll introduce pieces of music, they'll talk to audiences, they'll have a moment when kids are asked to talk. But too often, the kids are expressing things they think they're supposed to say, or things they think is good to say, or people will like to say. They haven't done the preliminary work that lets them pull together what they know and think, and then shape it for impact and share that. That's where you develop agency. I've seen it a lot in the US, and more recently, one particular project connected to El Sistema USA, which our faculty member Dan Trahey has been leading, works with a leadership group of students where they do exactly that process. They address serious questions in our programs and invite the kids to pull together alone and in discussion their unique and personal feelings about important issues in their programs, in music, and more widely, and then get ready to share those effectively at the El Sistema USA National Conference and in other settings. That really builds agency. And the first time I saw them present with this kind of preparation, they became the center of the whole conference because their voices were so clear and so strong and so helpful in opening up new possibilities for our programs. And where else in our programs can we build a sense of agency in music? I mean, what is the balance of musical expression when you're playing in a musical ensemble? I'm not a musician, so I don't know that mysterious realm where you're working toward the sound of the ensemble, but you're actually expressing yourself at the same time. It's a beautiful mystery for me, and I hope you're able to illuminate it for your students. Do you add chamber music? Do you add improvisation, composition? To target the outcome of agency, what are the best musical challenges to develop for it, including that subtle beauty of self-expression as a part of an ensemble? The second aspect is decision-making. Decision-making is a crucial act in all of arts. The moment you say this choice, not that choice, in life too, decision-making is an act of power. Agency includes the readiness to make considered decisions, not just jumping to I like it or I don't like it opinions or conditioned preferences, but taking charge of that act of power to make a clear intentional decision, to take responsibility for it, and to be attentive to its consequences. One thing I know it's not is satisficing. Satisficing is a word from psychology that means to accept the first reasonable decision that comes along, reasonable option. Satisficing does not build agency. It also eliminates the possibility for real creative breakthrough. It may get you out of the discomfort of not knowing something for a while, but decision-making skills requires you tolerate ambiguity for a time. Ambiguity tolerance is a part of effective decision-making. I have a niece who is a visual arts teaching artist, and she had a project that connected Harvard Medical School with an art museum in Boston. And she worked with doctors in training on how to look at paintings. So you don't jump to conclusions, but you actually start gathering ideas and observations about what's in the painting to inform your eventual interpretation. And the researchers found out they could take those skills of observing paintings and apply them directly to medical diagnosis. They could tolerate the ambiguity, the uncertainty for a time, enough to take in more information, not just snap to an interpretation, a judgment of what's wrong with you, but slowly piece together what's present. And they made significantly more accurate medical diagnoses. This is a case where art saves lives. And for our young people, we want them to be able to tolerate the uncertainty, to take in more information and make strong decisions. And the third aspect of agency is creative thinking, going beyond logic and pragmatism into fresh perspectives, into your own way of seeing a challenge, enjoying brainstorming of possibilities. What the definition of creativity is basically novelty with meaning, innovation that has value. It might be innovative to use a brick as a toothbrush, but it's not creative because it doesn't work for your teeth. But it might be creative to use that brick in some way in garden design and create something unusual, surprising, and beautiful with that. It is not creative to use a toothbrush as an umbrella. You get wet. But when the French fashion designer Thierry Mugler wove toothbrushes into dresses he was designing in 1975, using the toothbrushes as like bodice stays, making a comment about the old-fashioned corsets. It was considered so funny and original, it's still talked about to this day. My question is, where does creative thinking apply in music? Where do you use your creative thinking inside music? Yes, maybe in improvisation and composition, but how does it live in performing on your instrument? Abraham Maslow, the American psychologist in the 1950s, identified primary creativity, secondary creativity, and eventually tertiary creativity. Primary creativity is the creativity of the composer, making new worlds, the choreographer, the playwright. Secondary creativity is shaping works made by others for impact. That's the creativity of the performer, of the dancer, of the actor. They're different and complementary skill sets, and they tend to be pretty much overbalanced in most music education toward secondary, but we don't realize the relationship between the two, how they strengthen one another. And in fact, some kids are stronger in one than in another. Can we become more aware of the separate skills and develop them both? Okay, let's turn our attention to that AIM rubric. And we're going to look at the section of agency. We've been kind of withholding showing the full rubric to you. I've been afraid it would like be too much. It'd be overwhelming. But let's start to introduce what the rubric holds. And we're going to look at one of three rubrics. And this is the rubric about the destinations and aspects. And we're going to bring some of it up on screen and look at all the pieces it contains across the full row for each aspect. And we're going to start by looking at expression. What are the attributes, the elements that we have chosen to highlight for the aspect of expression? And the first two to look at are our general view, what AIM views in general we aspire to for the goals of student outcomes and expression, that students can, this is for expression, students can thoughtfully form opinions and ideas and effectively express them in multiple media, gaining confidence and clarity in articulating their distinctive artistic voice and point of view. They are confident in performing, presenting, or speaking up in front of others. Sounds pretty good. That's what we're heading toward. And our rubric talks about what Firebirds, what a teacher does to produce those results. And in general, the Firebird provides regular opportunities for students to practice articulating their ideas and opinions and to effectively communicate their views in both musical, small solo group formats, verbal, and other forms of expression. Then the rubric, as you move to the right, details a little more precisely what you would see students doing as they get better. So what does the expression of expression, what does their expression look like when it's underdeveloped? What would we hope to see in terms of student expression at the end of a Firebird year when it's somewhat developed? And what would we hope to see if a student spent several years in your program and your program was really focused on those destinations? What might they be able to do as they graduate from your program? And here's how we describe those three levels of development. Underdeveloped, the student is unclear about what they think about things. cannot or is hesitant to make their ideas clear to others. They tend not to speak up or mumble or ramble. Musically, solo moments are either non-existent, erratic, or very tentative. You've seen that, I bet. And that's the raw material we work with. Here's what we kind of hope for at the end of a Firebird year, what we would target and what you and your coach might choose to experiment for if expression were a key idea for you to work on. There, the student sometimes offers personal musical expression that is not explicit in the score or from the teacher. The student sometimes offers ideas, answers, or observations, sometimes making points with clarity, and shows some interest in more than one mode of expression. You can see it's starting to come. They sometimes can do these crucial acts of expression. And you and the rest of the program has built up this capacity somewhat for them that is ready for the growth of developed expression that we would hope to see after years in a program. And in this scenario, the student readily plays solo, speaks up in front of their peers, and will speak to wider audiences when asked. They have original ideas about music and beyond. They regularly think about things before they play or speak in order to deliver stronger impact. They may prefer one mode of expression, verbal, visual, musical, but are comfortable using others. Can you see that arc of development? That's just for student outcomes for expression. The rubric has that arc of development for all the different aspects. And that's not all. The rubric also contains the development of the Firebird as teacher. So for expression at an underdeveloped level, before a Firebird fellowship, or maybe in the early going of a Firebird fellowship, the Firebird occasionally asks students what they think, usually without a discussion of their sharings. The Firebird is not concise, clear, and authentic in their instructions and in sharing their own view on things. Accuracy is prioritized over expression in music. Does that resonate a little bit for you in your own teaching? No problem if it does. This is widespread in our field. And this is why we have the Firebird Fellowship, to focus on those areas that are most important for you in order to advance. And this is how we describe what we'd hope for at the end of a Firebird Fellowship. The Firebird is genuinely interested in hearing students' individual musical and verbal voices and in what students are thinking and feeling. However, the Firebird is still developing effective strategies for students to share or discuss their views in ways that illuminate or advance the music making or the group dynamic. In other words, the Firebird is beginning to hear student voices, but is not yet able to allow those voices to propel the learning in the room. The Firebird relies mostly on verbal sharing, is usually succinct and clear in their own instructions and observations. Sound like things you'd want to learn how to do? Maybe things you're already doing. Some of them not so hard, some of them not so easy. And finally, if that Firebird were to complete the Firebird Fellowship and then stay with AIM as a developing alumnus for years, this is where we hope you could develop. We consider this masterwork. The Firebird consistently uses solo music expression and exploration, including in composition and improvisation and engaging discussion, and uses enabling constraints and time-limited strategies to hear multiple voices and help students practice being sharp in expression. The Firebird models these skills in inspiring ways, both musically and verbally. So that's where we hope you would develop. I'm not going to talk us through all the rows, but I'm going to take a pause here for you to read through the other two aspects under agency, to read through our thinking about decision making and then about creative thinking, and start thinking about where your work currently lives in terms of development and where your students currently live in terms of development in the destination of agency. Going to pause, and when we come back, I'm going to give you a couple of homework assignments that'll take you a bit deeper. Welcome back. I hope you're starting to get a sense of the way this rubric might be helpful to you, to actually name, to clarify both the specific elements we're focusing on, where you currently stand, and in fact, where you might want to develop. I want to close this session with one more big idea. It's one of my biggest, and it's called the law of 80%. I call it a law to make it sound scary. And that number 80% creates the false impression I've done some research, which I haven't, but it does capture a truth. And the law of 80% says this: 80% of what you teach is who you are. Your most powerful teaching tool, 80% of your potential impact, is you as a model in the room. You're embodying that destination, that aspect in the way you are with your students. Yes, our lessons plans and activities are important, but far more influential, far more resonant is the way you model them for your students. It's a high responsibility because it means we need to live up to those destinations and aspects if we're really going to develop them in our young people. Do you model the destinations in your teaching? I'll ask some hard questions here. Do you model holistic development and bring your whole self to class every time? Or do you bring a gig energy, only part of yourself? There's good reasons that you might have to bring a gig energy. You're exhausted, you've got 4 other jobs. But our potential with the young people, if we want to develop them fully, is that we model the destinations and we bring our whole selves to every teaching opportunity. Do you model intrinsic motivation by actively trying out new things you're curious about to learn from? When I teach teaching artists outside of music, I insist that every single time they teach, they include an experiment, because we need that energy in the room. We need them to be experimenters, intrinsically motivated, curious teachers to model it for young people. Do you model agency? Do you show bold originality and your own way of teaching things? Do you own your teaching ideas? Do you try new teaching ideas because you think they might work? That's modeling agency. Do you model artistry in your teaching? Are your lessons beautifully designed, carefully, intentionally shaped, elegant, even when you're teaching something ordinary like scales or whatever that you've taught 100 times before? And finally, do you model community? Does your heart open to the potential of each group you teach? Do you respect the fullest contribution of everyone who is in the room? Do you model holding community every time as you teach? It's a high responsibility, and it's an amazing opportunity. Homework. There are two assignments to the homework this time, and they're different but connected. First, the homework invites you to do an agency inventory of your own life. This is to sharpen your awareness of the law of 80%. How, in fact, what are you bringing of yourself and your agency to your students? So there'll be a number of questions. I think it's self-explanatory for you to just answer for yourself. Take notes on where you stand in different areas of your life and work and agency. And don't worry, you don't need to be a superstar of agency in every way. There's no shame in that. None of us are. But maybe more awareness of agency that you model for your students can give some growth for you, agency during your Firebird Fellowship. Maybe you can demonstrate more with your students. So we'll give you this list of questions to consider and answer about your own agency. Do the best you can in answering them. And the second is a piece of homework that's practice in expression. Going to ask you to make a 60-second recording of something you have picked up in AIM so far that has resonance for you. Some specific thing that impressed you, why it's important to you, and what you want to do with it. Create a 60-second recording, and then we'll ask you to share it with another Firebird we'll connect you with, and want you to watch one another's videos and give feedback on how to make it a stronger statement. So you make the recording, you share it, you give feedback to one another, and then, having had some practice and some feedback, you make another recording of that same idea. So you have a before and after video of comparison. We're hoping the second one is stronger, but it enables us to think about strengthening our expression about things that matter. I recommend you get started on this right away so that you don't end up not being able to connect with your partner or doing it at the last minute, and so that second one doesn't get stronger. We don't want you to have a crunch at the end. So there'll be two assignments. Of course, there's a quiz for you to practice the ideas from this lesson, to think about them one more time before we leave this lesson behind. And thank you for your agency. I hope ours as AIM, we're pretty active in the world and in our experimentation. I hope it invites agency on your part so all of us can bring out this power in our young people.